Yesterday, Sayadaw spoke about Kaya Anupassi Viharati from the Satipatthana Sutta, Mahasatipatthana Sutta. And we undertake the practice according to the instructions that are described in that sutta. And it's not anything extraordinary. So there are four foundations of mindfulness, four types of satipatthana, because there are four different kinds of objects that we observe. The physical group of physicality, kaya, good and bad feeling, vedana, and thoughts, imaginations, that's citta, Anupassi Satipatthana, and various general objects, and these are Dhammas. These are the four kinds of objects. And because there are four kinds of objects, there are four kinds of Satipatthana. So if one observes the group of physicality as it arises, as it is every time it arises, that's Kaya Anupassi Satipatthana. If one observes the feeling, good or bad feeling, neutral feeling, every time it arises as it is, that's Vedana Anupassi Satipatthana. And if one observes thoughts, imagination, and so on, every single time they observe, every single time they arise as they are, that's Citta Anupassi Satipatthana. And if one observes seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, and all the general objects that there are, every single time they arise as they are, that's Dhamma Anupassi Satipatthana. So because there are four kinds of objects that we observe, there are four kinds of Satipatthana. And this is something that we must understand. Kaya means group or compound, or things that are collected together. So parts, the body is called Kaya because it is parts that are all collected in one place. So what are the parts that are collected? Well, there's hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, and so on. There are 32 parts that are apparent in the body. And things that are hard and soft, like skin or the nails and so on, these things are mainly earth element. They contain the earth element. And then there's things such as blood, urine, spit, tears, saliva, and so on, phlegm. These things have a flowing nature. So they're mainly water element, apo. And there are 32 parts in all in the body that are evident. And these are disgusting. And they occur in a group. Both because they are disgusting and because they come together in a group, they're called kaya. And these are physicality. So some things, we mentioned the earth element and the water element, but these things in our body are also hot and cold. So the element of fire is also tejo dhatu is also present. And the heat in our body is sometimes can be quite excessive. Is that what he said? Yeah. When we have a fever, for example, the heat in our body can even go up to something like 106 degrees. So when we have a fever, the heat element is very obvious. And there's also heat in the stomach that digests food. And this heat element is based on earth. It doesn't exist separately. And there's also the air element in our body. We breathe in and we breathe out. And there's air in the intestines and in the stomach. And there's 6 kinds of air in the body. And these are 4 just mentioned. And then when we move, there's air, wind that passes through the limbs that's caused by the mind. So this is the last type. And so there's upward moving and downward moving air. And then there's the air that moves through the limbs. And altogether there's 6 types of air in the body. And altogether, things that are a combination of Patavi, earth element, Tejo, fire element, and Vayu, air element, there's 42 types of things. And these are called kaya because they are collected together or grouped together. So in the body, there are 20 forms of the earth element that can be found. As Sayadaw mentioned some of them previously. And there's, when we feel hardness or softness, the earth element can manifest as hardness, coarseness, softness, tenderness, and so on. So consider the parts: hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, and skin. Well, of these, the skin is tender and soft. When we touch it, it feels tender and soft, and the teeth are hard. So these are both manifestations of the earth element, although they are different in their qualities. And this earth element is really there. It's a true reality, and to see it as it is, every time the rising arises, we observe rising. Every time the falling arises, we observe falling. Every stretching, bending, lifting, moving, placing. Every time these objects arise, we must observe them in order to see them as they really are. And when the mindfulness develops full energy, then we're able to see these true natures. At first, we don't. We see the form and manner. But when our mindfulness and concentration are able to go past those, we see things like hardness or softness. And I think that Sayadaw mentioned that the water element is also evident when we urinate. And the heat element, Tejo, there's just the ordinary heat we have in our body. We ordinarily have a temperature of around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And sometimes it can be a little bit high. We can have a fever, maybe 100, 101. That's not so bad. But when it gets up to be 104 or 5 or 6, it's very hot. So this element, the elements in our body, they change. They break down. So there are 4 kinds of heat in the body. There's heat, warmth, coolness, and coldness. I think that's what Sayadaw said. So, and the heat element causes things to be cooked. That's its function. And the water element, there are 12 kinds of water element, and water manifests as flowing or congealing or also solidity. And the air element manifests as stiffness, tension, and movement, and so on. So when we think of all the different ways, and there are many ways, and I couldn't catch them all, but there are many ways that the 4 elements of earth, Patavi, Apo, water, tejo, fire, and vayo, air, are combined in the body. So there's 42 parts that these four elements comprise, but they are all one unit. They're all combined into one body, and therefore in Pali it's called kaya, which means collection or group. So when we touch something that's hard, we're aware of the hardness. When with our mindfulness we contact warmth, or hot or cold, we're aware of those. Sometimes we touch stiffness, and so the earth element, the heat element, and the air element. Hardness is a manifestation of earth. Warmth, hot or cold, is a manifestation of tejo, fire. And stiffness, a manifestation of air. These three are all individually evident, but the water element can't be touched directly. However, it can be observed indirectly, because in order for a part of the body to be either wet or moist or solid, like a rock, those are all manifestations of the water element. So one knows it's present indirectly. We can only observe it in combination with the other elements. So, for example, when earth is combined with the water element, then we can be aware of the water element. When something is hard and flowing, or soft and flowing, or when something is stiff and solid, both stiff and solid, or both tense and solid, those are examples of how the air element combines with the water element, and the water element can be perceived in that way. So there are three kinds of elements, earth, air, and fire, that we can know directly by touching. And there's one we can't know directly. These are a group of physicality, and so they're called kaya. These four, the earth, Patavi, Tejo, Vayo, and Apo, are basic elements in the body. They're the basic building blocks, and they are the base for other physicalities. Other physicalities arise depending on them. And such as what? Well, form. Form is based on these four elements: visible form, and smell, and sound, and taste, and then also the eye base, the ear base, the nose base, the tongue base, and the body base. These all are examples of dependent physicality which arise based on the four elements. So there are these two kinds of physicality in the body: the base elements and then the dependent physicalities. And of these two kinds, the ones that form the base, these four great elements, are the more evident. So we start with observing them. And among these four, earth, air, fire, and water, of these four, the air element, Vayo Dhatu, is the most apparent. The rising occurs based on Vayo Dhatu. It occurs in connection with the air entering into the body. And the falling also occurs in connection with the air element. The in-breath and the out-breath, if we observe at the nostrils, it also occurs in connection with Vayo Dhatu. And so do bending, stretching, lifting, moving, placing. In all these actions of the body, the air element is the fundamental part of these phenomena. When we every moment of physicality contains 8 different parts. So when An example is, for example, when we look at our muscles, when we dissect a muscle, we can see that it's made up of different parts. It's made up of parts like tissues and bone also. Bone is made up of different parts, cells. And the elements also in our body, there are lots of parts coming together, lots of particles. And so there's the parts that are present in every moment of physicality are the four great elements, and there's also the quality of being visible, and there's the quality of being smellable, and the quality of being tasteable, and the quality of nutritious. And the only difference between one physical occurrence and another is just that these elements, one or another, is more evident. There's more of it than another. So, for example, a visible object, there's more of this quality of being visible than the others. Okay, so these collection, every sense object that we experience is a collection of particles, of physical particles. So all the different sense objects contain these same physicalities, but the different sense objects are different because one or another element is more predominant, or there's more of it, and the others are weaker. In one's body, there's muscle and flesh that combine together, and they have particles that are both soft and moist, and bones also. Bones contain they're hard, but in order for these things to cohere together, there must be water. Water is what makes anything cohere. So for the bones to be collected in a unit, a particular bone, it's connected by water. Water makes it cohere. And whatever the element is, whether it's Patavi, Tejo, Vayu, or Apo, the physicality is always changing. It's always breaking down. So an example of this is the weather. One moment it's cold, and the next it's warm. So this is the Dhamma of anicca. This is impermanent phenomena. And it's because it is impermanent, because it is changing constantly, it's not good. And there's no one that makes it this way. People think that there's a self in the body, but the elements are just going according to their own nature. There's not any self involved. What is in the body is just a collection of physical elements, physicalities. And these physicality is rotting. Even though we haven't died yet, it's still deteriorating and rotting all the time. So this physicality, kaya, is like a person that has three names. It's anicca, it's also dukkha, this unsatisfactory thing is that very kaya. And it's also anatta, without any inherent self, and also it's not beautiful, asubha. So the kaya is anicca dhamma, kaya is dukkha dhamma, and it is anatta dhamma. This is something that one must understand. So the Buddha said, Kaye Anupassi viharati. Kaye, This means the group of physicality. And these are true natures, sabhavas. Well, for example, the rising has the characteristic of stiffness, tension, movement. And this is the air element. In the rising, many particles of the air element are combined. And due to the in-breath, the rising occurs. The air comes in and the rising occurs. And falling occurs due to the out-breath. It's also the air element, and there's relaxation and becoming soft. So these are the nature, so for example, of the rising, the stiffness, tension, movement. These are its nature. And this rising, the nature of the rising, it arises, and having arisen, it passes away. Due to this, it's not satisfactory, it's oppressive, and there's no inherent self involved in it. So these are dhammas, that means they're true, they're nature, just nature. So we observe kaya, we must, Anupassi means that we must have the practice of observing kaya we must have the habit of observing the arising object of the arising as it is within the field of awareness of kaya. So one has to observe the arising physical object, which arises and then passes away, which is unsatisfactory and which is not self. One needs to observe it as it is. One needs to observe rising as rising, kaya as kaya. And one must gain the practice of doing this. One must do it repeatedly, again and again, observing the physicality which arises as it is. So as one practices, one will come to master the practice, gain the practice of doing this, and then one will know what the rising is clearly and distinctly. Whatever it is that one does, whether it's when one wants to know something or one wants to do something, is if there's no practice, then it won't be effective. Our learning won't be effective. So this word Anupassi, kaya Anupassi. Anupassi means that one has to do this, observe again and again, like we're practicing to do something. So we need to observe repeatedly, continually, without a break. One has to practice like this. And what is the essence of this Anupasana, this repeatedly observing? The Buddha said, Atapi sampajano sitima. So Atapi sampajano sitima, in that phrase, the word Atapi, means that one must make effort. One needs to try. One needs to have energy. And we gain energy by practicing. Only if one has energy, only if we practice, like exercise, only if we exercise will we have energy. So, Atapi is made up of the word atapa and e. And this atapa means ardent effort, active effort, not sluggish. It's this brisk, ardent, active effort which overcomes laziness which is cool and casual. So sometimes people don't want to practice, they only want something if they can get it really quickly. So one wants immediate gratification. So when one has ardent energy, one can overcome this sluggishness. So atapi means there must be atapa. There must be a hot, ardent energy. So an example of how this occurs in the practice is that when the rising arises, in the rising there's many particles, stiffness, tension, movement, and so on. And when the rising arises, as soon as that happens, we make the effort to catch it. We make the effort to get our mind there. So in one moment, in one noting of making effort to note the object, to catch the object, there's one unit of effort involved, this atapa. And then the falling occurs and we make the effort to get the mind there. So every rising and falling, if we try to do this every time the abdomen rises, every time the abdomen falls, then there are many units of energy involved. And when we do this often enough, the mind can stick to the object. So this, we need to make ardent effort. And only when we do so will the meaning of Anupassi occur. This quality of effort is similar to what we need when we throw darts. So we have to throw the dart so that it sticks in the target. But if our effort is excessive, then our dart will overshoot the target. So we have to have the quality of aiming to go together with the effort. So if we have aim together with effort, we can get the mind to the target accurately. In the summary that is part of the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, the factor of samadhi is not mentioned. However, later in the sutta, in the section on the path, it's part of what is mentioned. So when we observe the object, we need aiming. Vitakka is this factor of aiming. So we make effort to get our mind to the target of the rising and the falling. And we use aim and focusing to make sure that our throwing the dart of the mind is accurate. So this aiming and focusing is a jhanic factor. So this vitakka is a jhanic factor because it contains this element of focusing. When one applies ardent energy and aims the mind, then our noting becomes effective, and the mind sticks to the object, and it's as though it rubs the object, which is vichara. And when this is like when we throw the dart effectively, when we can throw the dart at the dartboard and get a direct hit, then we feel joyous and we feel happy. And it's the same way in practice. So Sayadaw said that we should try and see how the joy, when we apply the practice and our noting is effective, then joy and happiness will arise. So try this and see. When the object of observation, the rising and the falling, or the rising or the falling arise, we make effort and we aim the mind, and therefore the mindfulness will stick to the object. And when we become skilled by doing this again and again, when we become skilled, the mindfulness will be sustained on the object. And this is what is meant by the word patana. The mindfulness becomes based on the object. And at this point, one possesses sati. And so the word for the yogi of this person is satima, one who possesses sati. And this sati is praiseworthy. So if the mind sticks to the object, then the mind won't go anywhere else. It won't run away. And therefore, khanika samadhi, momentary concentration, will arise. This is due to, one has to treat this practice as an urgent matter which is to be done. When the mind sticks to the object, it falls calmly and collectedly on the object. With the sati, the mind sticks to the object, and the mind falling calmly and collectedly on the object is samadhi. And then what occurs is sampajanya. So when the mind falls on stiffness, when the mind falls collectedly on the object of stiffness, one knows stiffness. When the mind falls on the object of tension, one knows tension. When it falls on movement, one knows movement. And this is knowing kaya as kaya. So this word sampajanya or sampajano is made up of three parts, sam and pa and janya. And janya means to know. And sam means, for one thing, it means correctly. So one knows correctly. Samjanya means one knows correctly, and that this knowing is not through reading and not through thinking. It comes about by making effort to get our mind to the object when it arises. Now, pa means we know the object completely. So, and we also know for oneself. Samjanya also means knowing for oneself. So we know correctly, completely, and we know for oneself and completely. So, maybe they will again. So when the arising arises, sometimes we observe stiffness, sometimes we observe tension, sometimes we observe movement. These are physicalities. So we know physicality in that moment, and we are aware of the noting mind, noting it. So these are different aspects, facets of the experience of rising. Well, this is what is also another meaning of pa and janya. One knows the various aspects of phenomena. And this knowing is distinct from sutameya jnana, the knowledge gained from reading, and chintameya jnana, the knowledge gained from reflecting. It's distinctive knowledge, so that's also why the word pa is used. So the Buddha was very precise in his use of words. To the extent that we aim and make effort, and the mind sticks to the object, the mind will fall calmly and collectedly on the object. To that extent, we are Anupassi, one who repeatedly observes. In ordinary things that we do, ordinary work, when we make effort, we lose our energy and we need to take a rest. But in Dhamma, it is not so. We must always apply energy. So we have to apply the energy to note the arising object every single second, or else our battery will run down. So it's like not running your car. When you don't drive your car, your battery will run down. And the same way, we have to keep our car going, our mind, our mindfulness has to keep on going, because every single second that we apply effort to be mindful, we are adding a charge. We're increasing the charge of our battery. So our battery is not running down. So Sayadaw said, do not let the battery run down. Apply sati every second. So if we let up on our noting, then we will lose, our battery will lose its charge in that moment. So please always apply effort to apply mindfulness, apply effort to observe the arising object. And tomorrow, how this happens will be explained. That's all for tonight.